Well, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. I have Dalton Fabian on, who has been on a couple of times in the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast, and he's going to help us out with what happens when maybe residency isn't the right choice. Only a quarter of students historically have gone on to residency, and he took a little bit of a non-traditional path, and just catching up with him and seeing how he's doing. So, Dalton, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Thanks for having me again, Tony.
Hey, so just to give us a quick update, from what I remember, you graduated from Drake. You took some extra time in classes in computers, but that's, again, I'm going to diminish the value of what you took. And then you took a master's degree in computers, and I know it's not that. It's something actually very specific. And then you started an internship at a hospital, and I'm not sure if it was a hospital, but then you moved on to a full-time job recently. So please make that story more cogent and more accurate.
Sure. So I graduated May 2018. The job I got right out of school was working for a digital health company here in West Des Moines. I also started working as a PRN pharmacist at a methadone clinic in town, where I just work one weekend a month. And then in the fall, started that master's degree. So it's an online master's of science and analytics through Georgia Tech. And then this past spring, I found out about a data science internship at one of our local health systems. Was really interested in it, so I took the more non-traditional path of doing an internship after I graduated in this data science internship, and then did that for about 10 weeks, and at the end of that was offered a position as a data science analyst. And one of the reasons I took the internship was I knew that there was a good possibility that there would be a position open after that. And here we are.
So the direct route.
Yeah.
Well, what I want to actually get from you, since this is the residency podcast, is trying to make moves as you're kind of going on the fly. So, you graduate, and here you've got certain options. Do you go for more training with a degree? How do you get that degree at the lowest cost? So let's start with that one, because if I remember right, you didn't have to spend a ton of money on this master's, and you can spend up to $100,000 on an MBA these days. So tell me a little bit about how you kind of went to your graduate degree.
Sure. So my original plan was to do residency. I applied for residency, did some interviews, but didn't match with anyone and didn't end up going through the second round. So after I graduated, I was thinking of wanting to get into this data science thing that I had heard about, and was trying to figure out the best way to do that, and came across this master's program at Georgia Tech. And so it's based in analytics, so I knew data science and machine learning is all based on analytical techniques, so that I knew that this program would help me to get to where I wanted to go. And for the whole master's degree, which is about 36 credits, 6 of those is a practicum can be at your employer, the cost was just over $10,000. So it's something that I could do without needing to take out any more student loans, because I already had a bunch of those from pharmacy school, obviously.
Okay, so I guess the big question that people have is that, okay, so analytics, informatics, all of these different kind of jargon, is there some way that they can kind of figure out what part of technology they would fit into and enjoy? Because I think that the jargon kind of scares people away. Sure. When it's just that they don't necessarily understand, and they're like, oh, that would actually be I would really enjoy that, and I kind of like the way that works. I'm curious about things, or I investigate things. Yeah. How did you come to decide what you wanted and what you didn't want?
Sure. So I think even between my initial residency try, I was interested in doing informatics. And what I found was the difference between this data science thing I'm doing now and informatics was that informatics is really based on like improving processes in a hospital, making it easier for people to do things, or make it easier for people to do the right things. And with data science, there's no real, you don't need operations knowledge or firsthand knowledge of how a system works necessarily, because we are taking data from the electronic health record or claims data and trying to predict if a patient is going to go to the hospital. So I noticed that I was more interested in doing like programming, which an informaticist does a little bit of that with databases, but a data science role is much more programming intensive. We write a lot more in programming languages like SQL, R, and Python. And I knew I was really interested in that area because of some previous coursework that I had done versus some of the more operational areas.
Okay, well, in terms of like ease, I think Python is one of the easiest of the languages, but how do you kind of start picking up languages? So people might be familiar with, picking up Spanish or Italian because they're going on a trip and they pick up a couple words, but picking up a computer language, then keeping it in your brain. I heard that as soon as you get to your second language, it's easier to remember the first because now you're looking at differences like, well, in Python it's this, but if you go to this other language, it's this. How does someone start picking up languages? I know Coursera has free classes, things like that.
Yeah. So I think like an important thing is there's so many programming languages out there, and I use a couple in my job, but I think really the thing you should focus on if you're just starting is picking one language and getting good at it. Just because the skills that you learn there, kind of like you mentioned, a lot of them will apply to other programming languages, and you'll be able to pick them up pretty quick. As where to learn them, I'm a really big fan of this platform called Data Camp. And so they have, not tutorials, but they have courses on Python, R, SQL for databases, this newer programming language called Scala. So they have a lot of resources, but also Coursera is a good place. Udemy is pretty popular, Udacity. So those are a bunch of places that people can go from basics to even more complex programming.
Okay, and then so you've got some support from these online websites. Then where does the master's degree come in?
Yeah, so a lot of things we do in the master's degree have a programming aspect to them, but really the goal of most of the classes is to teach you, if you have this type of data, what analytical model or concept should you apply to it. So it's really programming language agnostic in terms of the classes that I've taken so far. You implement them in these concepts in a programming language, but you could do it easily with any of the programming languages.
Okay, and then there are some informatics-based residencies. There are not a lot, and I feel like they're mostly PGY2s, if I remember right, or some kind of combination. Can you talk to them a little bit just about what that would be like if someone were to try that route and what preparation they might need?
Yeah, so I think a good starting point, just like in regards to programming languages, so SQL is spelled SQL, is a common programming language between informatics and data science. So that's kind of how you get all of your data. In terms of the actual residencies, so if you have programming in SQL behind you, that's a plus. But then there's also two different informatics residency types. So there's the standalone PGY2s, and there's the PGY1, PGY2 combos where you stay at the same institution for both years. So I think there's only, as far as I know, there's only 3 of those. I believe that Johns Hopkins, LifePoint Health in Nashville, and then Aurora in Milwaukee. So I think for the standalone PGY2s, that's a situation where it's more important to ask your preceptors during residency if you can get some informatics experience while you're doing your residency, because then when you apply for that PGY2, you have some projects or experiences to speak to. But for a PGY1, PGY2 combo, it's probably more important to have more experiences, maybe in programming and informatics, but more so project management, like, how do you take something from start to end? How do you implement a new program or something like that?
So tell me about working with other people, because I did interview one person that was in a program like that, and she said most of her day, every day, was making nice between people that don't necessarily either work together or don't necessarily want to work together. And you kind of get caught in the middle because you're trying to make everybody's life better. But in some cases, it might make one person's life a little worse or another person's worse. And maybe this is more on the operations side with informatics. But can you talk about how you deal with, I don't want to use the word deal with, but how do you interact with other people? Because I feel like your role, I feel like people think that the data scientist is right next to the IV tech in the basement. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you're out there figuring out what's going on and what to do about it. How do you interact with others in your job?
Yeah, so from my experience in this position so far, I can speak to it as to how we interact, or how I interact with the end users of the tools that we create. So at Unity Point, we have tools that will predict which patients are going to be readmitted to the hospital within 30 days of discharge, or in the next year, which patients are going to be admitted to the hospital or go to the emergency room. And so this current project that we're working on is predicting those last two that I mentioned. And at the beginning, we met with the care managers who were going to use the data that we provided and really tried to understand what their current process was for how they do their job, how they identify a patient that needs to be enrolled in care management. And so I think what I got out of that is just being able to share, especially later on after we had already interviewed the care managers, I was able to help the rest of my team understand what a healthcare professional is thinking about when they're using these different tools, because I have been trained as a clinician. So I think that's the role that I played, and that someone who's in informatics plays. They connect the, in my case, care managers and the data science team, or in informatics, in the IT department and the physicians or nurses that use the health records.
Okay, well, you seem really happy with your job, but many that are going into pharmacy school are expecting to be speaking to patients each day. And actually, as I talk to people that are at that, top of the license job, they're like, God, I just talk to patients every day, and there's a bit of burnout from that, because, they're also, taking on the emotional responsibilities with that. Where does patient care come in? Are you a patient care person, or do you have interaction with the patients, or is your role just to, and I don't want to put just to, but to make the patients' lives better, or to prevent these readmissions?
Sure. So in my day-to-day data science job, I do not have any patient interaction, which is actually why, and maybe people will consider this if they're going into more of an informatics or data science, but that was kind of the reason why I wanted to do the PRN work at the methadone clinic in town.
Yeah.
Was because I really, during pharmacy school, like, patient interaction was one of my favorite things. So I knew I was going to miss that because I was going down a non-traditional route, and even more so since I moved into data science. But that's one of the things that caused me to reach out to actually somewhere, the methadone clinic. I had worked there as an intern in school, and just reached out and tried to see if they needed any help on the weekends. And so that turned into this once a month PRN work that I do.
Okay, well, let's actually switch gears and talk about that. I hear a lot of students that are, I don't want to say your generation, but I'm Gen X. I'm almost 50 now. Yeah. But are really looking to serve the underserved, or really find meaning in those whom they serve. Tell me a little bit about that patient population, how you got interested, and really how you feel in the way that you're able to make an impact.
Yeah, so this methadone clinic, I only found out about the internship when I was in school, because Drake has this weekly email that went out about internships in the community. Most of them are community pharmacy internships, but just wanted to learn more about it because it sounded interesting, it being at a methadone clinic. And what I really learned, and I think this helped me as I went on rotations and other IPPEs, is that most of the patients at the methadone clinic that I work at look like just regular people that you could see on the street. And I think that's a stigma that we've kind of placed on patients who are getting help for substance abuse, is we have a stereotype of them. But I learned in this internship and now in my PRN work that really the people who are getting treatment for substance abuse are just normal people. And it made me a lot more empathetic, I think, in future experiences.
I remember seeing a poster like that, like, which of the people on this poster look like an addict or addicted, and it was all of them, and it was just all of, the jobs that we all have, and it was kind of just striking when I was reading that, like, yeah, I didn't really think about it, because it's not like, you necessarily talk with your neighbor about things like that, so yeah, that was kind of shocking to me. Well, I guess, I've asked you a bunch of questions. Is there anything you want to tell this group that's coming into what is probably one of the most competitive residency seasons ever, and talk a little bit about that feeling that many of them have, which they don't like, that is, well, I have to get a residency or I'll never get a job?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have a residency and I love my job. So there's that.
It is false.
There are
it is
other
false.
Options.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's other options besides residency. And I think like an important part for me, which I didn't really know that this would happen at the beginning, was students should really let their preceptors know what they're interested in when they're on rotation with them. So actually, the data scientist on my team that I work with now, I actually met him during my rotation year. So I had told one of my preceptors that I was interested in analytics, informatics, and so they connected me with the husband of someone they knew, and he was in informatics, or he helped build the EHR at Unity Point, and when I shadowed him, he told me about the analytics team at Unity Point, who, when I shadowed them, told me about the data scientist at Unity Point. And then so I met with him, thought his job was really cool, and then just kept in touch with him on LinkedIn over the next couple of years, and then found this data science internship and then connected with him about that. So I think a couple important things there are: make sure your preceptors know what you're interested in, because they will connect you with people. And then follow that connection chain until you get to having an idea of what's out there. So if I would have just stopped at that person who was in informatics, I would have never found out about this data scientist. So if they mention something to you that sounds interesting, follow up on that and have them connect you to other people, because it led to me meeting Ben, the data scientist, and then almost 2 years later, getting a job with him.
Yeah.
And I think that's an easier way. So I'm an introvert just by nature, and I think that's an easier way to do networking than just going into like a big room at a pharmacy conference and trying to meet people. It's a lot more controlled and impactful, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I truly, that whole, well, it took 2 years to get here, and that, just seems horrific for, someone who's like, well, I just graduated. The loans are due in November by Thanksgiving, so we need to, kind of speed that up. But I don't know if you can speed that up. It just, you're kind of just riding the serendipity wave and just making sure everybody knows, hey, this is interesting to me. Do you know a person? And chances are we do. Well, how would somebody contact you now that you're, I don't know if you keep your school email address, or what's the best way for somebody to get you? LinkedIn or Facebook?
Yeah. LinkedIn's great. Facebook is great. I can share with you my email address that you can put in the show notes, but happy to talk to anyone who's interested in data science, informatics, or anything like that.
Awesome. Well, Dalton, Fabian, thanks for being on the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Thanks again for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about the interview process, go over to Amazon.com where you can check out 100 strong residency interview questions, answers, and rationales in print book, ebook, and audiobook.